And then what's the other thing I need to do is to share my screen. Yesterday, we saw that, I think it was in the footnote, he said that Rav Zilberstein has provided us with a way that we can be osek b'tzorchei rabim, even bizman hazeh. If you remember, if a person has stolen from the public and he doesn't remember, all the people that he's no way for him to find out all the people that he stole from. So the suggestion was by the Gemara, Yasok ba b'tzorchei rabim, let him get involved in community works, and at least that way he'll be able to, in some way, get some kind of services or goods to the public, and invariably people that he stole from will benefit as well, right? That was what we saw. So he said, the footnote had said, if you take a look in Rav Zilberstein's Sefer Chashukei Chemed, you'll discover how Rav Zilberstein deals with this. And he says he gives us practical examples of how we can do public works bisman hazeh. That was really the question, right? So let's take a look at that today, because I have that for you. I'm just going to share the screen. Maybe I'll just enlarge it a little bit so that it's easier to see. Okay, here we are. Here's the Chashukei Chemed. And hold on 1 second. Here we are. Avero sheben adam lechavero ganav meirabim ve'enu yodei lemilaha sheveiz tzarchei rabim yaseh b'hem bizmanei. If you did something that causes theft to be stolen, and you've damaged the community, you've stolen from multiple people, and you don't know how to do tshuva. So, what is tzarchei rabim bizman hazeh? So, she'ela kasav hashulchan aruch haroim v'hagaboim v'hamochsim. Shuvasan kashem mipnei shegazlu es harabim ve'en yodim lemi yachzoru. The Shulchan Aruch writes that it's very difficult to do tshuva when you're a shepherd or a tax collector or a fee collector for the community, because in the event that you've stolen from them by taking more than what you should have or by stealing their property, it's impossible to know to who you should make restitution. And therefore engage in community works such as digging trenches and pits. All right, today we don't need wells. There's a whole department that works for the government that takes care of all of those utility issues.
All as well.
So what should you do today? Like, what are practical things that you can do today? So Kosav HaShulchan Aruch tzarchei rabim mutar la'asosim b'chol hamoed kagon letaken hadrachim. So there's another example of what tzarchei rabim are in Hilchos Chol HaMoed, because it says in the Shulchan Aruch that even though you're not allowed to work on Chol HaMoed, but you are allowed to engage in public needs. So you're allowed to continue, let's say, paving roads on Chol HaMoed, or to remove, let's say, there's some potholes and stuff like that, or to remove any impediments. Another example is to place markers on graves so that Kohanim know to avoid them. That was a big thing back in the ancient and medieval world, that you would need to know, if you were a Kohen, where people are buried, so that you would know how to avoid those places. And to fix the mikvah. So he writes that it would seem that tzarchei rabim for a gazlan includes these things as well. Ela shalitzayin hakvaros sheis berzeh nafkamina rak lekohanim v'lo liyisraelim tzarech ion yechashav letzarchei rabim im yodea shegazlu gam Yisrael harei Yisrael lo yehanem mimenu. He says, however, marking graves may not be considered tzarchei rabim for someone who knows that he stole from Yisraelim, how that's going to benefit them. He says, "V'hinei b'shut aparkista da'anya dan b'misha ganav meirabim ve'eni yodei l'milah hachzer." This tshuva of Farkasta Da'anya, probably 19th century, I'm guessing. He says he deliberates also on a case where a person stole from multiple parties of the public. He says, would that be a way of making restitution if you buy the only esrog for the community? You know, you live in Anatevka, and so you decide for all of the people of the community. They used to have one guy who would buy the esrog for everyone in the community for the whole year, that year. And then the next year, someone else would do it. So would that help you fulfill your obligation? Because of Shinira, de'enu makayim takanas chazal b'knias esrog lahakol. And he writes, he says he does not feel that that's a fulfillment of tzarchei rabim. De'isa b'bavakama b'she'ein makirin yase b'hem tzarchei tzibor. V'amar Rav Chisda boren shichenu ma'aras. Because the Gemara, which is the source text, where Rav Chisda says an example of public works is trenches and aqueducts and things like that. He says, "Upirish Rashi lahachnis b'hen mayim lishtos tahavi davar hatzarach lakol v'yehen emehen hanigzolim." So Rashi explains why specifically wells and trenches and aqueducts. He says because everyone needs water. Since everyone needs water, then invariably you're going to be serving someone that you stole from. So you have to do something that's going to provide benefit to everyone in the community. And Rabbeinu Chananel says it specifically has to be trenches and wells and things like that, where the public will definitely benefit. But it at least has to be similar as the Shulchan Aruch writes. So he says buying an esrog for the community will only benefit most of the people, but some individuals will end up buying their own esrog and they'll never benefit from that esrog that you purchase. So therefore, you're not fulfilling your obligation. It's only if he knows that those people who are buying their own esrog, he didn't steal from. But there's a further problem. What if I stole from women who don't need the esrog, or from small kids who don't need it? He says each victim is only going to have a small portion in the esrog. That's insufficient. But it at basically, for technical reasons, that when you think about what's happening, each time a person takes the esrog, he acquires the esrog for himself and then passes it on to the next person who acquires the esrog for himself. So it turns out that the person who purchased the esrog isn't directly transferring ownership to the next guy. And so I'm not really giving him anything. Anyway, bottom line is, he says that an esrog does not cut it. V'yesh lahoyer medivrei harama shesiyim ala shulchan aruch shedavka tzarchei rabim ka'elu shem tzrichim legufa adam. Avol sha'ar tzarchei rabim kegon binyan beis hakneses asur la'asos b'moed. Now it's interesting as far as what kinds of public works you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. The Ramah writes it's only things that provide physical benefit to the public. But building a shul, for example, right? We have a construction project next door. Are they allowed to commence work on Chol HaMoed? So it's a Beis HaKnesses. So the Rama writes that you're not allowed to continue building a Beis HaKnesses on Chol HaMoed. V'hu adin de l'shar tzarchei mitzvah aser lasos meleches uman b'moed. And any other kind of professional labor is not allowed to be done on Chol HaMoed. V'nira degam le'inyan hagozo me'rabim dafka tzarchei haguf v'lo tzarchei mitzvah. And so Rav Zilberstein says, it would seem to me that when we talk about making restitution, you can't do something that's just for the needs of a mitzvah, but doesn't provide physical benefit. He says, so that's why Rav Moshe writes also, you can't just say, oh, I'll give money to tzedakah to make restitution. He says, because maybe that provides spiritual benefit to the community. And when they know that the community has, let's say, I give on behalf of the community, but that doesn't cut it. Well, Levinyan v'tikon mikvos who kilatzorchei rabim v'lachem tov sheyitain mikvos. But he says that fixing and building mikvos is tzorchei rabim, because I guess even though it's going to provide spiritual benefit, it also provides physical benefit as well. Umidivrei ha'afar kasta da'anya mashma d'leinin agozim me'rabim af tzorchei mitzvah shel rabim nechshav l'tzorchei rabim b'tzorch iyun. However, from the tshuva that I quoted above, it seems like if there's a communal mitzvah that I contribute towards, that's also called tzorchei rabim, like the purchase of an esrog. Ella sheyesh mitzvahs shehem gam tzorchei haguf ke'in mikvos ve'eruv. He says there are certain mitzvahs that provide both physical and spiritual benefit. Two examples are the mikvah and the eruv, because it provides you with physical benefit, which is linked to your religious observance. Okay, uchemavur b'shut mishnah halachos v'zelashana. As Rav Sternbuch writes, v'hineni kan lahatik sipor echad masha shamat mipikadsho shamaran hagrashaz Orbach Zatzal. He says, I'm going to quote for you a story that I heard from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Biyosi etzlo le, I'm not sure what this abbreviation is, lebikur b'Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. And I must have been by him, by Rav Shlomo Zalman, when I was visiting Yerushalayim. Okay, shalachar petiras hagon ha'aderet zatzal b'Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, ba harav Rabin Zion Yadler lifnei hagon Rav Shmuel Salan zatzal, va'amar lo heyos kimiyom bo'o shel ha'aderes l'Yerushalayim, kara oso va'amar lo heyos ki ha'yisi rab b'chutz la'aretz. So there was a rabbi named Rabin Zion Yadler. He came before Reb Shmuel Salan. This is going to the early 20th century, or maybe the late 19th century. And he says, I have the following shaila. He says, when I was a rav in Chutz La'aretz, he says, Ulai nehenesi ma'alti chas v'shalom b'mamon sibur shelo kahogen, u'ma'alti b'shlichus v'nischayavti lahashiv. He says, my concern is I was a rav in Chutz La'aretz. They gave me a salary, and perhaps I misappropriated some of the funds that they paid me. Maybe I didn't earn, or maybe I utilized community funds that were entrusted to me, and maybe I did it in an improper way. And he says, and therefore I would like to get involved in community works to be able to perhaps do something that can bring restitution to the community. V'lachein hitziali lasos eruv b'Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh v'hu mekabel alav kol ha'otzos ha'eruv kol yemei chayav. And therefore, he told me that I should help make the eruv in Yerushalayim, and that he would accept upon himself. This is, I guess, the Rav Shmuel Salant, that he would accept upon himself all of the expenses. He says, "You go ahead and you start working on the eruv." V'hisna imi shelo legalos hadavar l'shum adam ba'oda huchai. V'chein asa kol hadalit shanim shahayachai b'Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. And that's exactly what he did. He said, don't tell anybody that I am bankrolling this, but I'll be responsible for providing the funds to build the Eruv. And that's what he did for the 4 years that he lived in Jerusalem. Achshav sheniftar harav, alav lahodia es harav hagrash salant v'yirtze yamshich be'eruv v'imlo az yivata. So apparently the way it works is that the Aderes was the one who gave this Rav the advice. And after the Aderes passed away, he brought this to Rav Shmuel Salant and he said to him, I need to continue the work, but up until now, the Aderes was funding it. Would you like me to continue the work on it? I need some extra funds. Because he doesn't have sufficient funding himself to be able to continue. So this was the story. He came before Rav Shmuel Salant. This is all being related by Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And the question was, should this Rav continue the work on the Eruv as a way of doing penance for perhaps having stolen community funds when he was a Rav in Chutz La'aretz?
How do you determine the time?
What?
How do you determine the time? Like, is this a Ba'elam Ba'ed? Like, he has to continue doing this if he thinks he stole X, and then you don't talk anything about quantifying.
Correct. But it would seem like if you do a significant project for the community, then that would be sufficient. I guess you'd have to estimate, what did I steal? And is my labor commensurate to the amount that I stole? I guess you'd have to make some kind of calculus. In any event,
it sounds like this work will continue to benefit the community.
Yeah, well, certainly the Eruv will. So Hagrash Salan Tzatzal Hufta Vishal Heichlo Sipar Lo Mizeh Klum Arachshav. So Reb Shmuel Salant was very surprised to hear this account, and he asked this rabbi. He said, "How is it that I've never heard of this up until now? I've been living in Yerushalayim in the old Yishuv, and we're a tight-knit group, and no one said a word to me." And this Rav Ben Sion said, it's because we made this deal between ourselves to keep it quiet. Takev Hechlit Hagrash Salant Lahamshich Be'eruv. It was then and there that Rav Salant decided that he would bankroll the rest of it. Ulahachaziko Mikupo Shel Kol HaKol. And he would go to each community in Yerushalayim, collect on his behalf, and make sure that the Eruv was funded. So there was one of the communities in Yerushalayim that didn't want to participate. And they said, we're not going to carry on Shabbos. So we had no benefit from the Eruv. V'siyem hagrashaz orbach zatzal b'zeh halosha. Shemei osam shemianu az v'sirvu be'eruv kimat rubam kekulam b'neihem nasu machalalei Shabbos. He says the ones who refused to participate in the Eruv, most of their children, almost all of their children, became machalalei Shabbos. He says umehakupot shiskimu b'neihem shiskimu b'neihem nishru gedoli Yisrael gedoli le'olam. And the ones who participated in building the Eruv, their descendants became from Jewish leaders.
Now you have some groups that don't hold of an Eruv, not because of the Eruv itself, because they don't want to carry on Shabbos.
Yeah, but they should still participate in the funding of it. Even so, it's a community. It's a community effort. Oh, so how are you making restitution to those people? Well, think about it for a second. When you look at this story, there's a glaring problem. He may have stolen from a community, let's say in Zurich. Okay, we don't know where he was a Rav, but let's say he was the Rav in Zurich, and he's worried that he was entrusted with community funds and maybe he misappropriated them. He's not sure, and now he wants to do Tzorchei Rabbim. He's made Aliyah, is living in Eretz Yisrael. How are the inhabitants of Yerushalayim atoning for what he stole from the Jews of Zurich? So that in itself is questionable. But apparently this is sufficient. Even if there are going to be, it's a different public that you stole, that it's a different group of people, but if you do community works for the place where you're currently living, that is sufficient. And then another thing is that even though there may be a small group of those people who say, we don't need the Eruv, we don't want the Eruv, Nonetheless, since it's actually for the entire community, even though people choose not to avail themselves of that benefit, that's nonetheless considered to be tzarchei rabim. And then another thing that Rav Zilber, so what we've seen is mikvah and eruv. Those are two great things that you can do for tzarchei rabim bisman hazeh. And then he writes, Od nira diyesh makom shekulam yicholim lehanos mimenu kagon beit cholim. Another thing you can do, like the Kloisenberger Rebbe did with when he came to Eretz Yisrael, he worked on building a hospital in Netanya. So you can work on helping to build a hospital. Ve'afal pi shelo kol ha'olam cholim mikol makam kulam nenim sheyet sheyesh beit cholim be'iro. He says not everyone is going to get sick and need the hospital, but everyone in the community benefits knowing that there's a local hospital that they can access. Sheyodeya shelachol tzara shelo tavo yesh lo makom laleches sham miyadit. That there's more immediate medical service available locally is a big relief, and it provides immediate benefit to everyone, even just psychological benefit. Od nira debate kisos b'makamos tziburim. Another thing he suggests is to help build public bathrooms. Ubifrat liad bate knesses uliad bate kvaros in tzarchei rabim. Especially building bathrooms or washrooms nearby synagogues and cemeteries. He says, that's also tzarchei rabim. I noticed in recent years, they built bathrooms in Machane Yehuda. That wasn't always that way. You went to Machane Yehuda, you had to hope that you didn't have to go to the bathroom. Today, thank God, there are bathrooms in Machane Yehuda. So whoever had that great idea, I don't know if it was the municipality or they got together, all of the shopkeepers, and they decided to invest in that.
Also happened in Harmon Club.
Really?
Because they renovated so much of Harmon Club with the.
Oh, right, with
there's bathrooms and washing stations.
With the condos, yeah.
The condos.
Yeah. So the Bir Halacha writes this. He says, "V'zeloshana ra'isi be'iza makomos shemisatzlin bebniyas beis hakisei l'rabim v'yesh al yedezeh kama michsholos." He says, "I notice that there are certain places where communities fail to build sufficient public restrooms." He says, and that is halachically problematic. Shemilvad shechasar al yedezeh midas atznios od boin al yedezeh lekama kilkulim. He says, besides the fact that it takes away the tznius aspect, because a guy will have to go pish in the bushes, and maybe, it'll be immodest, right? Knowing that a guy is, runs into the...
There might be thorns.
and it could create other, you don't want to happen to you what happened to the Hezbollah, when you run into the bush, right? So, od boin al yedezeh lekama kilkulim. And it could also lead to a number of other kinds of things in halacha where you can't recite a bracha because you have to hold it in and things like that. Al kein mitzvah rabba l'sayeya bazeh k'dei lahasir hamichshalos ha'elu miYisrael v'yazkiru es shemo yisbarach b'kedusha. Therefore, anyone, and this sounds like it's a joke, but it's not. Anyone who helps build public restrooms is doing a tremendous mitzvah, and his name will be always remembered by Hashem in a holy way, right? And this will actually, he says, that it will enable people to mention God's name with holiness. So you're being mezakeh the rabbin. You're providing zuchus to the community by helping, if someone were to say, what can I do that will help the community? So if someone were to say, well, why don't you build a public restroom, along Bathurst, so that someone would laugh at you. They say, well, what are you talking about? That's ridiculous. But it's not ridiculous. It's actually probably, when you think about all of the other things that people, very good-hearted people, throw their money at, this actually ranks much higher than people would think. Another thing you may want to consider is that, installing running water by these bathrooms. In other words, back in the day, they used to have bathrooms which were more like the porta potties that we have today. They didn't have any running water. So to install sinks that have water huge zikoy harabim. Vafilu rak sefolim kedei sheyuchlu lirchotz yadeim. Even just having sinks where people can wash their hands with their own water. Kol ze bichlal tzorchei rabim. That's all included. Ubifrat harotze lasot mechanot l'shtiyat mayim b'makomos tziborim. All right, how about this? Donating a drinking fountain, in a public area, like in a park or in an area which is traversed by many. That certainly is helping the public. Let's say, there's a mall and a guy can say, I'd like to donate a water fountain to the mall because that's going to, for sure, that's literally in line with what the Gemara says to provide water needs. And maybe a Pashat Yid will say, I'm just a simple guy. I don't even know how to get involved with this kind of stuff. What should I do? So he says, Kfar Kosav b'Sefer Orchos Tzadikim b'Zel Shona. So the Sefer Orchos Tzadikim writes, B'chol Eila hadvar mechayotze bahem kasha bahem ma'od hatshuva. He says, obviously, there are many times when tshuva is very difficult. Ach yesh takana gedola l'taken hakol, mitechila yashuv hachote b'chol inyani hatshuva. He says, the first thing is that first of all, do tshuva internally for the things, the crimes that you've committed in the past. V'yira v'yavin b'chol chelkei hatshuva v'yimsor nafsho lasos v'hakol yasel l'shem shemayim b'chol kocho u'b'chol libo b'seisa v'galoi. If a person sincerely dedicates himself to that effort of tshuva, az HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekel lav inyane hatshuva madricha l'derech yishar l'tshuva. God will then provide you with a pathway. In other words, where there's a will, there's a way, essentially, he's saying. In other words, if you really exert yourself to saying, I really want to do tshuva, God will give you the ingenuity and the insight to know how you can fix this. Vimlo yada cheshbon hamamon beno makir hanoshim asher gazal. And then the Sefer also writes that if you don't know how much you stole and from whom you've stolen, Yitein lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu shiyaset tzorchei rabim kigon livno gesher o letaken be'erot. God will give you the insight to know which public project you should work on, whether it's to fix a bridge or to fix a well, o livnot bate knesiot, or to build a synagogue, o shar tzorchei rabim, or on other community needs. You see here, building a Beit HaKnesset, does count as public works, even though for Chol HaMoed it doesn't. But the Orchos Tzadikim says it's okay. V'tiyah hana mimenu l'chol ha'olam, and thereby you'll be providing benefit to the whole world. L'misha gazal mimenu v'gam lachem, from those from whom you've stolen, and also to other people as well. V'yu'uyin gam b'shut mincha shlomo. Shekasav shahagozel asarabim v'takanasu shiatzet sarchei rabim zerak midas chasidus v'lo min hadin. The Sefer Mincha Shlomo writes that when someone steals from the public and the Gemara provides a fix to do tzarchei rabim, he says that's not a halachic imperative, because I guess his opinion is that this is really the rabbis telling you to go above and beyond the letter of the law, because the letter of the law would tell you that when you've stolen from the public, there's really no way to make restitution. But I don't know why he adds that last caveat, but the bottom line is that a person should strive to do whatever he can to find a project that even nowadays is possible. So what we've seen is the mikveh, the eruv, and everyone, by the way, can contribute to these projects. What mikveh in our community doesn't need money for its upkeep? What eruv in our community, the community eruv, always needs money to compensate the people who inspect it and to pay for repairs to the eruv that are ongoing. It probably I think someone quoted to me that the eruv costs about $100,000 a year, just to be able to make repairs and to compensate the checkers. And then also public bathrooms, water fountains, anything that will provide benefit to the community. What about helping to donate towards a park? That would seem to me also to be a great thing that a person can do. There's no shortage of things, even bisman hazeh, that a person can think of that would actually end up benefiting not only the Jewish community, but the community at large, and not just for religious purposes, but just also to provide physical respite or a relief and stuff like that. Okay. Any other comments before we
Is
hold
there
it?
a concept of, when you steal from someone, but under the you have to go and ask them for the chila? How do you know when everything was done silently, going back to Rabbi Salon, the whole story, keeping it quiet? Where's the concept of, or just in general, you steal from the community, you should come out and make a public announcement. I did this and I'm planning to do this. I'm asking everyone for mechila. You can go to this.
He didn't go there. He didn't go there. Yeah. It could be that because he had only a suffix, this was his way of making sure that he could cover his bases. But maybe he did ask mechila. We don't know. I don't know.
Like the people in Zurich, for example, to go back and say.
Right,
Yeah.
it's to them. You stole from
Yeah,
them, even
maybe
though
you
you're
could-
making tshuva from here.
Right. Maybe you should go to the people of Zurich also, in addition to everything that he said.
And also,
Okay.
mikvah is only beneficial for certain people. It's not beneficial for everybody.
It depends.
A men's mikvah
It depends if it's a men's
or a
mikvah,
ladies' mikvah. So
Or
if it's a ladies'
ladies'
mikvah, it's
mikvah.
only beneficial to those who need it. The mikvah. For
Right.
everybody,
people who are past that age don't need the mikveh anymore. That's true. It's a good point. Although it ends up benefiting, I would argue that a mikveh ends up benefiting the entire community, because without a community mikveh, you won't get people to move in